Welcome to TAC Makes, a podcast produced by the Art Center in Corvallis, Oregon. The following episode is one of 6 conversations between artists and collaborators involved with the exhibition Wildfire and Water. Wildfire and Water was made possible through a partnership with Playa in Summer Lake, Oregon, and is on view in the main gallery May 15th through July 5th, 2025.
I'm Linda Gast. I'm a visual artist and I make work about land and water use issues and climate change.
My name's Theo Dreher. I'm a professor emeritus from Oregon State University. I've worked in molecular biology, and towards the end of that career, it came around to working with lakes. And through that, I became very interested in Lake Abert, a hypersaline lake in the southeast of Oregon that has been dry a couple of times over the last decade.
Hi, Theo. It's really great to meet you.
Hi, Linda. Very nice to meet you. I can see you're in your studio there. And I'd love to hear more about your artwork.
I've had a long-term interest in the effect of water diversions on watersheds and lakes. And over the past 5 years, I've gotten interested in the impact of wildfire on watersheds as well. And the watershed for Lake Abert is impacted by both water diversions and wildfire. And I feel a connection to Lake Abert because I feel a real connection to a lake here in California called Mono Lake, which is very similar to Lake Abert in being a hypersaline lake that's an important stopover for migratory birds on the Pacific Flyway. There were a lot of different things that I considered addressing through the artwork that I might make, and actually lots of different formats that it might take. I took an afternoon in the studio just to play around, and this design concept came up, and I sketched it out as one of the possibilities for the artwork I could do. And the longer it sat with it, it really resonated with me because I wanted to make, I realized I wanted to make this artwork to convey how the Lake Abert watershed basin is under stress from this really complicated interweaving of water diversions, climate change, induced drought, and wildfires, and also how the health of this watershed and the people and the animals and plants who live on it are all interconnected. So the idea of making that something that was so interconnected really appealed to me, and that was how I settled on it. And in this artwork, I visually convey both the water diversions and the areas where wildfires have been in the upper watershed of the Chihuahuacan River.
Yeah, Linda, I'm looking at your fabric artwork here, and it's really striking. The role of the influence of the fires is really obvious. The influence of the diversions, I see what you mean because you can see the channeled area of the upper marsh particularly. There are two marshes where the Chihuahuacan River flows out of the highlands where the fires were into the flatlands, which used to be a large swamp area and where there's been a lot of drainage, and that's now where the diversions occur. I suppose you've got the very strong color differentiation of the lake and the burnt area, and that makes a focus for the eye. But certainly the diversions, you can see where they would be because of the channeling that is unusual compared to all the other watercourses in that watershed.
Water usually flows in circuitous paths, not straight
Doesn't
lines.
straight lines, does it?
Yeah. So you can tell
Yeah,
those straight lines are human-made.
exactly. Yeah. Well, it was the diversions that got me interested in Lake Abert. I was the president of the Oregon Lakes Association for 10 years. And Ron Larson, who last year published a natural history on Lake Abert, approached us in the Oregon Lakes Association some years ago to and challenged us to do something about Lake Abert, which so this would have been 2018 after the desiccation event of 2016, and since then it went dry again in 2021, and he had published a paper about the 2016 event, which said, yes, obviously it was a dry year, it was an El Nino period, and that's always a challenge for any area with regard to water. But if it hadn't have been for the agricultural diversions, then the lake wouldn't have been anywhere near as dry. And that's not to blame farmers, but it's to put a spotlight on the only thing that we can control. We can't control the weather, we can't control the climate, but we can control whether there are diversions or not. And so since then, the Chihuahuacan farmers and others living in that area approached environmental groups, including Oregon Lakes Association, and we've started a friendly discussion. It's been going for 2 years now. It's mediated through Portland State University and Oregon State University, and we've had wide-ranging discussions. We're hoping for another 2 years of funding through the state. The first 2 years was funded by the state of Oregon. And the intention is, to find a solution that is good for the lake and good for the people.
Yeah, the impression that I got during the residency, we had the opportunity to meet with two daughters of ranching families, as well as Autumn Muir, who is
right.
the person with the
You're interested
Chihuahuacan
in the uplands, isn't it? Yeah.
Watershed Collective, and
Yes.
just the collaboration that is now going on between these parties, because it's coming from the grassroots as opposed to coming from the government down. And I think that's going to yield, I'm hoping it's going to yield some really effective results, and that even though the people who have to make the changes, it's going to be hard, they're doing it, under their own volition, knowing that this is benefiting their long-term future.
We're very focused on getting water into Lake Abert, and water is a very touchy issue because there's often not enough. We've sort of touched on things that have hit raw nerves, and so far we've been able to navigate really friendly and productive discussions. I think all parties agree, with the need to do so, that it's a problem that Lake Abert's gone dry and probably will go dry again. We're really at a trust building period and trying to understand how everybody feels and understands about the issue. It might be a clear issue to some people, but others have a different viewpoint. And so the legislature is just deliberating at the moment over this month and next, and hopefully we'll have continued support for the next 2 years. And there's a committee in the House that has been particularly, with the two co-leaders, are particularly invested really in our conversations and see that we've made good progress. From my point of view, the whole area is under stress, like lots of our areas. Oregon has been in a drought state for a long time. It isn't now. There's no county that is in a drought state currently, but that's pretty unusual over the last 10 years. Probably long-term agriculture needs to make some changes too, and I sort of think that we could be a change agent for the better.
Yeah, I agree. That is a problem of the perception of these hypersaline lakes, and they are a different kind of beautiful water body to appreciate that don't involve typical human recreation activities. They involve ones that are less common, like bird watching and hiking and just sitting with nature. Swimming in hypersaline lakes is pretty fun though, because of the flotation that you get from
You
all
would
of
have
the
done that down
salt.
there, yeah. Right. My father
Yeah.
grew up in Palestine, and he talked about floating on the Dead Sea, but yeah, I've never tested that.
Yeah.
There's no fishing. There are no fish. The only live organisms are microbes and shrimp and brine flies, and those invertebrates are the ones that are there in vast quantities. A gigantic smorgasbord that's so easy to eat that brings so many birds to fatten up before their migration.
Something that might not be obvious from the photograph of my artwork is that I cut out the areas that were burned. So the watershed itself is made from a textile fabric that was then stitched on the sewing machine using quilting techniques. But then I cut out the areas that were burned, and also I cut out the shape of Lake Abert. And then I made thread lace by stitching together different colors of thread. And then I inserted the thread lace into the artwork. So those areas are actually slightly transparent. You can see through them.
Is that a manual weaving sort of process kind of
No,
thing?
I did it using a substance called dissolvable embroidery stabilizer, and I stitched it on the sewing machine with interlocking threads. And then I put the dissolvable stabilizer in water and it melts away and it leaves just the network of threads. And so
Right.
then I stitched that network of threads into the holes that I had cut out. And it's intended to convey the fragility of the lake and the
Oh, yes.
fragility of these burned areas of the watershed.
Is it, did you stayed at Playa for a time
I
when
did.
you were getting to know?
Playa Summer Lake every 2 years runs this art and science focused residency. And I applied, and I was lucky to be one of 9 artists who were selected to participate in this very unique collaborative residency where the theme was water and wildfire, which is perfect because that's what my artwork has been about for the past 20 years. And we met with scientists, policymakers, researchers, and ranchers, and had conversations with them over the period of 10 days. So it was a residential opportunity where we lived at Playa. We each had a nice cabin and a beautiful studio. And every day we had activities scheduled where we had meetings and presentations. We would go out in the field. So we got to see that upper marsh area where the ranchers graze their cattle in the water diversions that are done through the marsh. And then we also visited the burn areas of the watershed. And then we did a visit to Lake Abert. And Ron led that
Right, I imagine,
session.
yes.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and he gave
right.
us quite extensive, it was at least 2 evenings of long presentations about the lake that were wonderful, that went back to the geology and, the prehistoric
Right.
history of this lake and how it was formed, and all the way up through the present day. And he also shared with us ancestral sites that are located by the lake, which is another wonderful thing to go visit. They're not obvious, and so they're a bit of a treasure hunt if you don't know where they are. And it's pretty fun to discover them.
But I understand there are a lot of um, Native American artifacts around because it was clearly an attractive place with a very large marsh and a lot of water birds, which would be easy to imagine for a place that seems so unusual and devoid of usual sort of life, but then supports such huge amounts of beautiful birds that do interesting things like the phalaropes that they make a little whirlpool. Probably Ron told you about that. They paddle in a circle to bring the brine shrimp up so that they're easy to pick off from the surface. Very beautiful birds. And you get a lovely view from that Abert rim across the length of the lake, especially when it's got water in it. But as we said, around 2016 and 2021, it went dry, and that's pretty unprecedented. It was dry in the 1930s in the Dust Bowl, maybe for a number of years, maybe drier than it was now, perhaps. Don't know, but the records aren't so clear. But in between, it went for a long period with substantial water and productivity. And so it's when it goes dry that you don't have the productivity of those invertebrates, and the lake's ability to support those birds that are dependent on the migration is then hardly there, or isn't at all. And then those birds, what do? We think they might go to Mono Lake, which is reasonably close. Maybe some would go to Great Salt Lake, or perhaps a few other possibilities. But There's certainly food in other places, but not in such vast amounts that's easy to collect as at Lake Ebert, which they're doing to fatten up very quickly before long migrations.
Yeah, and these lakes were spaced out perfectly for them. It takes energy to fly from lake to lake to then resupply on all the
Yeah,
good energy food. And if you're
yeah,
missing one of your stops, that really decreases the survival ability of these birds to make it to the next one. So
exactly.
I
Yeah,
think, it really creates these vast ripples of vulnerability.
right. And of course, if generally you have, because they're distant, but also in the same geographic region, roughly, so that when one's under drought, it's likely the other one is suffering to some degree under drought as well. So you've got stress at multiple places, the multiple key places at the same time.
Another thing I don't know if you noticed about when I stitched the thread lace for the lake, I showed that part of it was dried up with the brown threads.
Yes, right.
So,
Yep.
yes.
The north end, that's the shallow end.
Yes,
That's where it
that's the shallow end of the
gets
lake.
dry
Yes.
first. And then there's this interesting thing because you have persistent winds often from one direction, and the lake's oriented north south, and if there's a wind from either of those directions, it can push the water en masse. So it's called the seiching effect, SEICH, and so the water is no longer horizontal. It's no longer flat. It's sloped, and so that means
Wow.
that because it's so shallow, that could expose quite a lot more of the mud.
How deep does the lake get at its deepest point?
Well, I think it's 11 feet at the deepest, but it does have, which is not very much, but it's even more shallow over quite a large part of the area.
Does the way that the artwork is displayed mean anything to you? Does it resemble anything?
Yeah, I was wondering the way it's suspended, sort of. It's a bit like I was reading, I was reading about some biographies just yesterday, and one of the people was took on animal welfare and was worried about was looking into slaughtering, and it seems in a way that the watershed is suspended like a slaughtered animal and so susceptible to things. And the issue there was that sometimes in slaughterhouses, animals aren't entirely stunned. And so, brutal sort of thing, but there have been brutal years for Lake Ebert. So that's one thing that comes to mind.
I like what you're connecting to in it. So for me, when I looked at that the cutout shape of the artwork is actually the boundary of the basin for Lake Ebert. And when I
Right.
looked at it, I thought, this kind of looks like the shape of a cowhide. I decided to display it. Originally, I was just going to display it using nylon monofilament threads coming off of it, hung from the ceiling so that the shape would just hang in space. But then I decided to stretch it like a cowhide being tanned for leather tanning. And that way I could also reference the ranchers who are
Good. Ah,
intimately
right.
involved in this whole
Interesting. Yeah.
process of the future of the watershed. So, and then I
Right.
also
Right.
liked the fact that it created this tension and stress feeling that this watershed is really under tension and stress. It's getting pulled on by all of these factors.
I really enjoyed hearing you talk about your thoughts behind the work, Linda.
Oh,
That was
thank
pretty
you,
interesting.
Theo. And I really enjoyed hearing about how you came to love and appreciate Lake Ebert and the things that you're doing to try to ensure the long-term survival of this important piece of the whole
Yeah. Yeah.
ecosystem.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, this is great.
Thanks for listening to TAC Makes a Podcast. You can find more episodes on YouTube, Spotify, and at theartscenter.net. That's arts with an S. Be sure to follow us on all platforms so you never miss an episode. Keep creating, keep connecting, and we'll see you next time.